Welcome to Force and Fire, making your game more metal. And I am Dr. Jeff Howard. I'm a little out of breath, and I'm Associate Professor of Game Development and Design at Dakota State University. And I've written a couple books. One is on quest design, quests, design, theory, and history in games and narratives. And the other is about magic systems. It's called Game Magic, a game designer's guide to constructing magic systems. I'm also the lead designer of an ongoing project called Arcana, which is a ceremonial magic simulator, as well as a tool set for constructing your own magic systems. And this talk is about turning it up to 11. It's about infusing your ordinary leather whip with abyssal fire, turning it into a metal whip, a metal flaming chain whip. And the structure of the talk is going to take the form of a double LP. And for those of you perhaps not initiated into vinyl culture, a double LP would be two long playing albums. That's the LP. It's what LP stands for. Such as Black Sabbath's We Sold Our Soul for Rock and Roll. So the first disc would have a side A and a side B. The second disc would have a side C and a side D. And the name of this double LP is Force and Fire. Side A, in the beginning, is the song. Side B, the song, spawns the word. Side C, the word forges the world. And side D, the mechanics energize the world. This is a fourfold process, but it's important to remember that this process of making your game more metal, it's not strictly linear or one way. Instead, it's cyclical and intertwined, like a snake biting its own tail, or many snakes swirling together and biting all of their own tails. So you wouldn't have to start with audio to make a metal game. You could start with an art style, or a mechanic, or a story element. And as long as the experience that you're delivering is brutally sublime, broodingly gothic, magically rebellious, then it's metal. But just in terms of history, in the beginning of heavy metal is the song. Specifically, in the beginning of Steppenwolf, who, in their song Born to be Wild, said, "I like smoke and lightning, heavy metal thunder," thereby cementing a connection between the rebellious biker counterculture of the 1960s and a particular musical style. But metal's been around for a lot longer than that. Beethoven was eminently metal, as we can hear in Dan Mum's version of the Moonlight Sonata. The Moonlight Sonata is metal before the term exists because of its passion, its intensity, its sweeping grandeur. At the same time, it's important to remember that metal is a crossroads. It's a crossroads of culture and geography, Europe, Africa, Southern America by way of the blues. It's a crossroads of time, the ancient, the medieval, the 19th, 20th, and 21st centuries, all converging diabolically, as in Robert Johnson's Crossroad Blues.
I went to the crossroads, fell down on my knees.
And while Robert Johnson's acoustic guitar might not immediately suggest metal, its intervals, its use of an interval called the Devil's Interval that we'll get into later, and its subject matter, Robert Johnson's partially self-constructed semi-autobiographical legend of meeting a dark man at the crossroads to make a deal, a diabolic pact that would seal his musical fate. These things are eminently metal. Indeed, we might speak less of one metal, but of many metals, of many subgenres and sub-experiences. And we can circumvent any potential interfactional fights between these various sub-branches of metal if we understand that the most important thing is that metal is magic, and magic is energy. So when Ronnie James Dio makes the sign of the horns, he says that he learned it from his grandmother, called it the malocchio. This is apotropaic magic, the magic of warding off evil energies and drawing energies of power inward. When Dio says, "I cry out for magic," he is invoking energy to suffuse everything he makes. And this is what we can do as we make our games more metal. If we begin then with the song can be broken down in part into the riff. A riff is a driving rhythmic motif, a powerful and repeated melody that is instantly memorable and addictive. In games and in game narrative, riffs resemble narrative pacing with steady forward movement along a critical path, as well as, in mechanics, the addictive grind of a repeated core mechanic. At the same time, the power of the riff is often rooted in dissonant elements, elements which are deliberately grotesque, horrific, disturbing, the modus diaboli, an interval, either the diminished fifth or the augmented fourth, depending how you analyze it, which was outlawed by the medieval Christian church because it was thought to contain pagan energies, erotic energies, the energy of tension. And you can hear it in this classic self-titled song, Black Sabbath. The devil's interval reminds us that sometimes elements which deliberately do not fit with our whole, which clash with it, can provoke fascination through their contrasts. And the devil's interval is not the only type of contrast in metal. Metal revolves around contrast. It's the essence of its energy. Riffs provide contrast to solos, bursts of virtuosic, often neoclassically influenced melody, as in this moment from Bloody Tears from the soundtrack of Castlevania II: Simon's Quest. And you can hear it, that delicate beauty amid the violence and the horror of the riff. Once the song is firmly in place, the song spawns the word. It can inspire lyrics and other verbal elements. The song is generative in the sense of procedural generation, and different types of metal will inspire different lyrical flights of fancy, whether it is the high fantasy of power metal with much soaring triumphantly on the backs of unicorns, or whether it's more doom metal, reveling in brutality and the grotesque. One example of this potential of the song to generate the word, to spawn the word, is Paradise Lost, John Milton's Paradise Lost, which in some sense is the ultimate metal poem. And you can see the generative power of Milton's epic poem, which he regarded as song, in a random Twitter bot tweeting lines from various books of Paradise Lost. And any one of those lines could serve as the title for a metal album, or part of it could be used as a metal band, or even the dialogue or item descriptions from a metal-inspired game. Into this wild abyss the wary fiend stood on the brink of hell and looked a while, pondering his voyage, for no narrow firth he had to cross, nor was his ear less peeled with noises loud and ruinous. This inspiring power of the story of the devil's rebellion, the rebel angel, is a heavy metal archetype whose power has not been lost on heavy metal musicians and the creators of their visual art, their merchandise, and their posters. And while Led Zeppelin's poster may be as much the fall of Icarus as the fall of Lucifer, Black Sabbath has clearly embraced the Miltonic vision of the rebel angel. But these are all signs and portents foreshadowing the figure of Raziel, who was cast down from Soul Reaver 2, in which the generative power of Milton's song has become even more powerful through the work of Amy Hennig, who takes the name Raziel from the Apocrypha, who weaves together strands of Gnosticism and Lovecraft to suggest that the god of Nosgoth is in fact an evil, oppressive demiurge. And the logic of that cosmic metaphysical rebellion against the very laws of the multiverse themselves inspires tales. It functions almost as a generator through its logic of rebellion. And so what we're looking at is a diagram by the great Andrew Plotkin, aka Zarf, who created timelines of the many forking and intertwining tales of rebellion and vampiric possession and demonic imbuing of weapons that run throughout the multiverse of the Soul Reaver 2 series, infusing it with metal energy. I would suggest that the reason why this tale of the rebellion of a fallen angel resonates with heavy metal musicians and game writers alike is William Blake's insight. The reason Milton wrote in fetters when he wrote of angels and God, and at liberty when of devils and hell, is because he was a true poet and of the devil's party without knowing it. We have been taught in countless game writing workshops to rein in our deathless prose, to kill our darlings. And while an editorial voice is certainly a useful thing to have, a little bit of Sturm und Drang, a little bit of breaking out of our strictures and limitations, our players will thank us for it because it will infuse their experience with energy. In Blake's definition, evil, as when we call a riff evil. Evil is the active springing from energy, and good is anything that tries to restrict that energy. If we listen too much to those who would restrict our energy and our rebellion, we become pawns of the false god Drew, who hates dark souls. As in the horrific tale of The Writer Will Do Something, in which Drew is an obnoxious fictionalized producer whose marketing research suggests that no one should use Dark Souls as an inspiration, even if it would be highly useful in helping to bring a team together in its narrative design. In contrast to this negative horror story is the narrative implied by Darkest Dungeon, in which a put-upon scribe gives in to the power of his own madness, and in so doing, takes a more active and directing role in design. Narrative design that pulls together art elements and mechanical elements and audio elements to create a whole that is greater than the sum of its parts. And in this whole, writing is not neglected. Writing is allowed to soar majestically. Darkness closes in, haunting the hearts of men, and now the darkness holds dominion, black as death, teetering on the brink, facing the abyss. As life ebbs, terrible vistas of emptiness reveal themselves. These are bursts of blackened prose, like the riff that pervade the game, deftly intertwined with its mechanics, often indicating state changes as characters lose and gain afflictions and various other dark forms of romantic madness. And sometimes the writers of Darkest Dungeon engage in a solo. They let themselves go free to write a majestic Lovecraftian monologue that can fill entire pages. And when we do this, the word can inspire our visual artists. The word forges a vision of the world, as in the work of Iron Maiden's cover artist, Eddie Riggs, whose cover for Life After Death and all of his Iron Maiden covers involve a rebellious mascot named Eddie who is breaking free of chains, sometimes even the chains of death, always inspired by the lyrics of Iron Maiden's songs, which can move through a variety of settings and suggest a variety of worlds, from ancient Egyptian to Bedlam to futuristic cyberpunk worlds. The key here is that music and lyrics are helping visual artists to create worlds. And when those worlds are so richly created, they function as generators for not one game, but for multiple, for Power Slave, for Iron Maiden's Ed Hunter, most recently for Iron Maiden Legacy of the Beast, a mobile game on your phone in which every aspect of the game, from its loading screens to its progress bars to its upgrades, is suffused with the metal energy of Maiden's lyrics and visual art and audio. This is what it feels like to live inside the world of a metal album cover. What is required here is not just art, but art direction, art in the style of a particular something designed to create a particular effect, as in Pusshead's work on Damage Incorporated, which became a game by Paranoid Productions. But there isn't simply one metal visual style. There's many ways to look metal. Could be the psychedelia of Skinner in his video for The Black Plot. It could be the Art Nouveau stylings of Florian Bertmer. It could be the print monotypes on parchment of Karamazid. All these are metal for their world building. This has not been lost on the fan communities of various metal-inspired games, so that at least two and many more metal t-shirts have emerged out of the universe of Dark Souls, so that the battles with various bosses become death metal t-shirts, and Ceaseless Discharge, the most death metal name ever, directly taken from one of the bosses in Dark Souls. And Slain, Back from Hell, described by its developers as an interactive heavy metal album cover. The reason this works is because there's a soundtrack by former Celtic Frost bassist Kurt Victor Bryant, and there is art direction by Andrew Gilmore, a self-described metal goth. And through this collaboration between these two individuals across disciplines, they're able to forge a metal vision that is greater than the sum of its parts. When we build metal worlds, we're often thinking in terms of tableau, less of linear plots and more as brief episodes. Here now the Requiem of Blood in Castlevania, Rondo of Blood, Castlevania Dracula X, in which a naked succubus rides on the back of a skull that shoots laser beams. Or in which our protagonist leaps on the back of a horse-drawn hearse and does whip-based battle against the Grim Reaper himself, atop the corpses of thy brethren, literally, giving us the feeling of what it would be like to live inside of King Diamond's Abigail album. When we're building these sorts of metal worlds, at the highest level, there are 4 traits or attributes that define a metal world: the sublime, the gothic, the weird, and the grim dark. The sublime refers to an aesthetic experience beyond human comprehension, a vision of natural and cosmic grandeur in which human beings are insignificant. Looking down over the edge of that canyon, not only does it dwarf the man looking down into it, but a single step would kill him. And in that danger is the power of the sublime. The gothic featuring wild landscapes, ruined architecture, supernatural horror. Ravenloft is metal, because Ravenloft is Gothic, directly derived from the Gothic. It's the Gothic pocket dimension of the Dungeons & Dragons universe. Innistrad is metal, because its cards are a machine for generatively combining Gothic elements in the Magic the Gathering multiverse. The Shire is not metal. But ringwraiths are metal as fuck. Michael Moorcock fused together the traits of epic fantasy with those of weird fiction in his Elric saga, producing a world that is decadent, psychedelic, mind-warping. In the words of Alan Moore, Elric's Melnibone is warped with a touch of fractal horrors and fluoresces with toxic elf repellent. Melnibone is metal. And Warhammer 40K, it's very metal. Its motto is that in the grim darkness of the far future, there is only war. And out of this motto comes the aesthetic trait of grimdark and an entire anti-Tolkien movement of fantasy, from George R.R. Martin to Mark Lawrence's Broken Empire series. And when we fuse these aspects of metal worlds together, we get Yharnam in Bloodborne, which is gothic, grimdark, weird, and sublimely metal. We could take a cue here from Dan Pinchbeck's excellent book on Doom, which he titled Scary Dark Fast, to suggest that all three of those words become one word, because Doom is characterized by one unified experience that fuses all of those traits. We might say, taking a page from Pinchbeck, that metal is defined by gothic, weird, sublime. And this is certainly true at the macro level of the overall world, but it's also true at the micro level, at the level of level design. Metal level design is a surreal, non-Euclidean nightmare. It is the castle and the inverted castle of Castlevania Symphony of the Night, threatening always to topple over on itself in its involuted, twisting hallways, or the Winchester house-like stairways to nowhere in the second level of the Tower of Latria from Demon Souls. Metal level design is the architecture of madness, always different, yet somehow always the same, as in the many iterations of Castle Ravenloft, its spires corkscrewing off into the void. And for a level design, for a world to draw our players in, to energize them, it is ultimately the role of mechanics to energize the world. But we have to understand that for a level to be fully metal, it's not enough for the gameplay to be simply brutal, to be Kratos diving in willy-nilly with his chain blades. There is the riff, and it is brutal, but there is also the solo, and the solo is above all elegant and graceful. So that Devil Daggers, one of the most metal games of the last year at least, has the rhythms of the riff and the grace of the solo. It's a ballet of circle strafing and explosions of fire. Which brings us back to the title of this talk, which comes from an invocation of the occultist Aleister Crowley, who intoned, "About me flames my father's face, the star of force and fire." Crowley is begging for magic. He's calling it down, commanding it down. And when we pull it down into our world, it can infuse the entire thing with abyssal fires, as in this flaming pentagram from Doom 3. I urge you then to go forth and, at play in the contrary between your inner editorial voices and the energy of infinite cosmic rebellion, I urge you to go forth and live deliciously. And we might have time for a question or two. Okay. And if we run out of time, I'll be over in the wrap-up room, 3014, and I'd love to talk to people about metal games. Do we have time for a question or two? About 3 minutes, okay. So, sure. If anybody's got anything, I'd love to jam.
Okay.
Right.
In most of your examples, you have like a complete diegetic world that is metal from inch to inch. But my curiosity is when you encounter, like, in Overwatch, for example, you have this character of Reaper, or you have this emergent genre of like cute metal with baby metal in Japan and like these other manipulations of genre. Do you think that the appeal here is the same appeal as completely saturated metal, or is this sort of like interacting with other genres, having a counterplay?
Yeah, so the question there, does an entire metal world have to be suffused by metal, or is it possible that some of the energy could come from the contrast of metal and non-metal elements? And I think both are possible. I think metal is inherently energized by contraries and contradictions, so the riff and the solo dialectic. But you could have something like called My Little Pony Souls, Friendship is Darkness, and which I believe actually is a meme somewhere. I'm pretty sure it is. And there, what we're simply doing is creating a stronger contrast between the good and the evil, the energy and that which puts a boundary outward circumference around it. So both are possible.
Excellent, thank you.
Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah, a question on a similar vein, I think. So even this My Little Ponies example, it's still mixing something that is not metal with something that is metal, but that metal still just seems aesthetic. How does this idea work with something that doesn't have the aesthetic of metal? Is that just not metal? Can a game be metal but not have any of the aesthetic?
Yes. So the question is it possible for a game to sort of have the spirit of metal, even if none of its elements individually would be recognized by themselves as aesthetically metal?
And I guess, to that, what is that? What is the spirit of metal without the aesthetic?
I think that the spirit of metal is the energy of cosmic rebellion, and cosmic rebellion would not have to take the form of something that's loud or brutal or dark. So if the cosmos in which someone exists is ruled by metal deities, then it would be a form of metaphysical rebellion to worship Steven Universe, or to be part of Eternia's power of friendship. So I think it's the rebellion and the energy that's key, and when we recognize that rebellion is cosmic and not sort of inherently violent, then I think that's how something with no explicitly metal elements could nonetheless have the spirit of metal.
Okay, thanks.